Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another weekly call for community solutions hosted by the Forbes Funds and GPNP. For those of you who haven't joined us before, our team has hosted these community calls weekly since March 2020 to provide nonprofits with critical resources and updates, a shared space to discuss challenges, a snapshot of relevant local, state, and federal policies, and timely insight from subject matter experts. Since that time, the Forbes Funds and GPMP have hosted 5,526 meetings with the participation of over 47,000 dedicated community members like yourselves, and we continue to hear from members that this time remains valuable. We do all of this utilizing a dual framework that draws on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the social determinants of health to align cross-sector and guide the outcomes of our work. And additionally, the 8 returns model guides how we measure the success or returns on various forms of our investment. For today's call, we encourage you to go ahead and use the chat function to share your name and organization with the group, as well as any comments or questions you might have during today's call. And we strongly encourage you to join us on screen to maximize engagement. For those of you who are unable to join on camera today, thank you for joining us, and we hope you're safe in transit. We'll reserve time for a Q&A after our speaker presentation, followed by a Forbes Funds GPMP ecosystem updates and public policy recap from our GPMP director, Emily Francis. And as a friendly reminder, there will be a poll at the end of the call. Please be sure to complete that survey so we can keep our content and resources relevant to you all. So today we have with us Sheila Bell and Falon Weidman of the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. And Sheila and Falon will highlight the crucial role that program evaluation plays in increasing our organization's impact and funding. They'll also offer a sneak peek of the AIU's upcoming training series, Evaluation for Impact, Foundational Skills for Educators and Nonprofits. So today we have Sheila with us. Sheila is the program director of the Evaluation, Grants, and Data Department at AIU, where she leads and manages a diverse range of state and local program evaluations. These include Pennsylvania's 21st Century Community Learning Centers, the Educating Children and Youth Experiencing Homelessness program, and several initiatives focused on youth arts and education. Sheila is also skilled in grant writing, training educators and nonprofits, and providing guidance in strategic planning and program evaluation. Her career spans over 25 years with leadership roles in public health, human services, and education, including positions at the University of Pittsburgh, BCRC, and the Allegheny County Department of Human Services. Throughout her career, Sheila has directed numerous high-impact evaluation projects, secured millions in grant funding, and developed strategic plans that support community health, human services, and nonprofit organizations. She's worked closely with local and state government agencies, academic institutions, and community organizations to improve service delivery and enhance program outcomes. In addition to her role at AIU, Sheila serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh, where she teaches graduate-level courses in program evaluation. Sheila also holds a master's in social and public policy from Duquesne University and a bachelor's in sociology and political science. Lots to bring to the table. Thank you for being here, Sheila. We also have with us today Falon Weidman. Falon is a senior program evaluator with the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. She's a lead evaluator for several statewide and local programs, including the Pennsylvania 21st Century Learning Centers program and the Migrant Education program. With a Master of Public Administration degree from the University of Pittsburgh, Falon brings extensive experience in mixed methods program evaluation, GIS mapping, data visualization, and qualitative analysis to her work. Her expertise spans both U.S. and international education and nonprofit sectors, with a special interest in rural development and environmental issues. Falon's diverse background also includes teaching experience in the Federated States of Micronesia, project coordination at Pitt's Ford Institute of Human Security, and a leadership role managing a technology grant at the St. Clairsville Public Library. She also volunteers as a soccer coach and mentor for refugee youth in Pittsburgh with Open Field. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. We're so excited to hear from you all today. Before we get started, I'd love to invite Fred to open our discussion. Fred?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be on this morning. It's sunny. Hopefully, everybody gets 20 minutes out in the sunshine today. Um, we're excited about the conversation today as we look at the space that we're in and the need for nonprofits to really better aggregate their data and be able to tell their story. Um, Gone are the times of anecdotal data being enough to provide support for the granting process. I don't think it's undervalued. I think is value in conjunction with other data, both qualitative and quantitative, especially when it comes to storytelling. I think what we're going to hear today is important for the sector, in particular, as we start to look at cumulative impacts, and both from the standpoint of dollars received and also from the standpoint of strategic collaboration. So I'm excited to hear today's presentation. Moreover, I'm excited about what pathways exist moving forward for nonprofits to consider given today's stressors and shocks. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Fred. With that, I will pass it over to Sheila and Falon.
Well, first, we just want to thank everyone for having us today. We're really excited to be here and to talk about program evaluation, which always isn't, everyone's favorite topic. It's data. People tend to get nervous about that or worry about, that's so technical or that's so much effort. How do I find time to do that? But what Falon and I are really passionate about is helping people evaluate their programs in a way that makes it easy and part of your everyday activities. And we're really committed to building capacity with organizations so that they can manage their program evaluations over time and grow and learn with us and take those things on and not be as intimidated by, what you might think of when you hear the word data. So we really wanted to start today. Thank you for the lovely introductions. That was a lot. But we wanted to tell you a little bit about where we're from and what we do. So we are both from the Allegheny Intermediate Unit Evaluation Grants and Data Department. The EAIU EGD department, as we call ourselves, was founded way back in 2000. So we're over 20 years. We've been part of the community. A lot of the work we've been doing is at the state level with education, but we've been really wanting to expand out and work more in the local community, especially with our local school districts and local nonprofits, and really impact the work that's being done here. Falon, did you want to introduce yourself or have anything you want to add just with EGD?
I don't think so. Thank you for having us. I mean, like Sheila said, we have extensive experience with statewide grants that are funded by federal dollars, but then we also work with several local community organizations managing their evaluations. And like she said, we're very passionate about making evaluation accessible and understandable for everyone. As you saw in my bio, I wasn't initially a data person. I was in direct service. So, I kind of bring that to my evaluation practice, I guess. And that's kind of something that we, try to prioritize when we do this type of work. So, we want to answer any of your questions that you might have about this.
Yeah, and what we do at the IU, we can support people in a number of different ways. We can help you with program development. We have extensive background developing programs and thinking about things like logic modeling and really getting everyone on your team on the same page and working toward the same outcomes. We also help with grant writing in that space as well, because there's a lot of data involved in that too. As you're building your needs when you're writing a grant, really thinking through the data you need to show that you're ready to take your program to the next level as you look for additional funding. And then a lot of what we also do is reporting, and we've been working a lot in to build our capacity with more innovative storytelling type reporting. We do a lot of very formal reports for the state right now, but we've also been working with local nonprofits and folks around infographics, working with the Cultural Trust and Pittsburgh City Theater. And it's been really fun to jump into that space and make data more accessible in a visual manner. So one of the things we really wanted to get the word out about is the training that we're offering. As was noted in earlier, I teach a class in program evaluation in the summer semesters. I'm at GISPIA in program evaluation, and it's a lot of foundational skills, and it's run more like a workshop, that class. So we wanted to bring that kind of that background to the community and started to design a training series. So the first 3 dates, it's actually starting next week. I'm going to grab the link to the training and put it in here, paste. There's an Eventbrite to talk about it. So we wanted to really make it an iterative process to provide foundational skills if you're interested, so that you can kind of start building your evaluation over time. And we foresaw this as taking place in the spring and then having a deeper series in the fall, and then next winter taking it even another level deeper. So you have a chance to reflect and practice and, really think about how you're applying those and bringing it back into the conversation. So the first session is just understanding the basics of program evaluation, what it is, why does it matter, really what does that evaluation process involve from, planning the whole way through the quality improvement cycle and thinking about what am I going to have to take on as I think about this. And we thought that was really important to level set, so everyone is sort of seeing the big picture of what it is. So as you're thinking about building this into your ecosystem, you'll have a way to like map it out over time. And our second session comes in April. That is building the blueprint for your program, sort of your map for your journey. So if you want to take on program evaluation, one of the first steps we recommend is really thinking about doing a logic model, which is like, some of you may have done those before. And some people say, oh, well, we did that and it's not, that useful. We've heard that feedback before, but we want to show you how it can be useful and how it can be a tool for communication and to start building what your story is. So when you get to the reporting part, you're always bringing that logic model back through the process. So we're really going to have some fun in that session and play with logic models and, build some together to give you hands-on skill building experience. And then our third session is really thinking about data collection methods. So once you know what your logic model looks like, it's really digging down into that next step to really get in there and start playing with that data, thinking about how you want to collect it, which pieces, and how you might map that out over time for your data piece. In the fall, we're going to have a series called Mastering the Essentials. So we're going to bring everyone back, hopefully, to talk about the logic models that you've created, do some workshopping of them, getting feedback across the community or whoever's in the training, so we can do like critiques with each other and taking it to the next level. We're going to then have a session on surveys and how to really develop those survey questions and making sure that you're getting meaningful data. And then the last one will be on focus groups, looking at that more qualitative approach and doing a deep dive into how to conduct one of those and what it really takes to do the analysis of qualitative data like that. And our final series in the spring, the last 3, is from data to action. So then it's sort of like you're collecting your data. So now what are you going to do with it? So our first session then is going to be around wrangling that data, thinking about simple strategies to organize it and analyze it. And then the next one will be on the storytelling piece with, okay, you have these results. What are you going to do with it? How do you report it? And then the last one will be thinking about data for decision making and improving those outcomes, taking what's really working for you, winning grants, driving change with the data, and continuing that quality improvement cycle. So that's what we've got. Falon, do you have anything that we've missed or?
I don't think so. I mean, like Sheila said, this is really designed to be an education series for folks that are unfamiliar or maybe a little bit scared by program evaluation. We kind of came from a place of understanding that, new nonprofits don't always have the funding that they need to hire external evaluators or hire, their own on-staff evaluator. So we really want to, try to give folks in the community the skills that you need to, design and conduct your own evaluations. But also, as I'm sure you've noticed, a lot of grants require an evaluation to be built in, or at least some data collection and some surveying. So that can help you with your, your grant writing, because oftentimes you do need to explain, how you might conduct your data collection and your evaluation process. On the topic of grants, I did want to also mention that we do have a grant network newsletter that sorry, excuse me, my allergies are a little bit bothering me today, so I'm a little bit stuffed up. We have a grant network that we will push grants out to, people who sign up for this newsletter. It's maintained by our evaluation specialist, Jesse, and he is sending me the link to that. So you can all, if you're interested, you're welcome to sign up. Sheila might have something else to
Yeah,
share about that.
yeah, here I can share out that link. Is the EGG. It's a SurveyMonkey. And if you sign up, like Falon said, we try to do some research. A lot of the research we're doing on grants right now is more in the education space, being that we're in the AIU. But we're always willing to expand that out as well, and have been looking for opportunities. We just push those out to that network. And we also do some grant training as well, so can always keep an eye on the website for that too. Does anyone have any questions for us?
Yeah, let me take a look. I don't see anything in the chat, but I want to double check to see if anyone has a hand raised. Are there any questions for Sheila and Falon? Otherwise, of course, I have a couple to go over while we wait for people to chime in. I just want to thank you for coming and taking this time and space to reiterate how important data is. As you guys mentioned, it can be one of those things that falls down the priority list or feels like I don't know how to do that. Let me focus on what I know how to do. And it's just so important, especially when we're talking about fundraising and storytelling. So we really appreciate having these resources. A lot of the people in this room are overstretched and not experts in this area. So really excited to connect you all. I sort of wanted to have you reiterate or reinforce who should be looking to get involved with these workshops, with this kind of work, because I know oftentimes some of our brains turn off and think that's our development person, or we don't have a development person, evaluation
Yeah.
person. And so I would love to hear more about who you've worked with that aren't necessarily in that role, but are still benefiting from, learning these skills and applying them, and really benefiting from being cross-trained in the way that nonprofit leaders really need to be.
Sure. A lot of times we work with the program directors of projects, that are running programming and are just trying to figure out, is there anywhere I can like focus and do things a little differently or a little better? Or what can I do to, maybe I'm overstretched and we want to streamline the service delivery offerings that we have. So we may need to remove some things, so what's working well that we want to keep, and what's not working as well that maybe we should shed. So how do I collect data on that? So program directors or executive directors, a lot of times, yeah, a lot of the folks we work with don't have their own evaluators. So, it's sort of staff on the ground that are in the space to use data. They're looking to use data for decision making, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
And I see Mary has a question for us. Mary?
Hi, thank you so much. This is very helpful. Since September, we've been collecting data in a new way using sort of a CRM, customer relationship management kind of software with mapping. We are the ARC of Greater Pittsburgh. So we advocate and work with families of children with disabilities who you serve in our Western region. My question is about mapping and are you open to collaborating with organizations like ours to provide, it doesn't have to be individual level data, but data that kind of at least heat maps where people with disabilities, students with disabilities are living? And I ask that, or which school districts they belong to. The reason I'm asking that is, for comparison, when we do get a lot of issues from one district, we would want to go to the district and work with them on solving whatever the challenges might be. And so it would be helpful to have comparison data, and it's very, very hard to get access to that. So thank you.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that question. GIS mapping is sort of my, I guess, bread and butter, my favorite part of program evaluation. So yes, I will say that that is something we can definitely help you with, and that we do have experience with. But what you're describing, basically a heat map to be used as sort of a needs assessment, is something that's done pretty often, and it can be really helpful to sort of, overlap, your or this is the population that is there, this is the population we're serving, and kind of see if who you're serving is reflective of that population in the area. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with mapping, and that's really great that you're already kind of have that on your radar, because it's sometimes underutilized in evaluation.
Thank you so much. That's great.
Wonderful. We also have in the chat a question from Eric. Curious if you all are working with the Regional Capacity Building Initiative at all.
No, we're not, but excited to dig into that and learn more. And thank you for putting that out, because yeah, we're always looking to collaborate. So we'll be interested to learn more about that.
The reason I ask is, their fundraising component that they're going through talks about logic models as part of it, and fundraising readiness. These things seem to obviously dovetail together very nicely, and so in the interest of time and capacity for ourselves, it's trying to pick and choose how these things fit together, or which to do. We actually have meetings that overlap each other in a couple of these instances. So, whether it's the conversations you guys have, or Forbes Fund, making those conversations to see how the alignment might help us as nonprofits discern the process of where we bide our time would be greatly appreciated.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Eric. Are there any other questions for Sheila and Falon? I'm looking at my...
I did have a quick question.
Yeah.
Just kind of piggybacking on Eric's point, is there kind of like a micro credential or certificate or something from each of these kind of professional capacity building opportunities that the AIU provides? Just because I know that there's a lot of space in the nonprofit sector, like exactly as Eric said, where, fundraising is the skill to build versus the data analysis. And you guys have such a wide range of resources that I'm not sure if there's a way to show I have this skill because of the AIU, and then, be able to promote it to other folks in the network as well.
Yeah, we don't have a specific credential. We do offer Act 48 and 45 credits. So that's been one thing that's out there that we can help you with. We do offer certificates that someone's gone through it. So it's just our own capacity building certificate. We'd love to do more of a micro credential and partner with others to do something a little more formal, but up to this point we haven't. No. But the credits are out there, so if you attend, absolutely, we can get you those credits for professional development.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
This was a part of our discussion, Sheila and Falon and I, as we were preparing for the call, how important that is right now and how we could partner on that. And we talked a little bit as well about our AI cohorts and how that might be incorporated into the grant writing as well. So a lot of ideas. And again, that's the beauty of this space is we can all come together, share what we have, and put it on the table and connect after and figure out, again, as Eric said, pooling these resources and doing what's best for everybody. So we really appreciate all the questions, all the input, and happy connecting. So are there any other questions for Sheila and Falon before I switch over to Emily? All right. I don't see any, so I'm going to pass it on over to Emily for our ecosystem and policy updates.
All right, good morning, everyone. So let me make sure I'm going from the right slide here. All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. There are, as you well know, I'm sure, a lot of headlines that we're seeing in the news. So one of the kind of approaches that we're starting to take on the community calls each Monday morning is, yes, a review of the headlines, but rather than focusing on, what's being said in the article or by the agency that's doing a specific type of reporting, we're putting it in context of impact on nonprofit organizations and also things to keep an eye on, because a lot of what's coming out reflects, sound bites, flip-flopping, a statement that gets made and then very quickly challenged in the case of a lot of executive orders. And so just for the sake of sanity and being able to prioritize where we're putting our attention and time, here are the headlines that are kind of most relevant at this point based on the last few days. So the first that you've probably seen, especially related to investment in foreign aid and the dismantling of USAID, is that the State Department is reviewing foreign aid projects. So the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor is scrutinizing foreign assistance projects to identify funding related to climate initiatives, transgender support, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. And this is allowing the executive order freezing certain aid programs for 90 days to be followed as things are being reviewed. The takeaway is that any organization that is working with a foreign serving organization and their project is linked to DEI, climate, or transgender issues is currently under review. It may face funding cuts if they are deemed misaligned with the administration's America First policy. One thing I do want to share before the impact on nonprofit organizations and things to keep an eye on piece is that it's really important to look at sources of data. We've seen multiple examples of, I'm going to use, Gaza, for example. There was an article and a few statements made by press officials that there was funding being misspent in Gaza, when really, if there had been further reading of what was scrubbed, it was Gaza, Mozambique. The same thing happened in a couple of other areas where I'm sure everybody's seen like the viral transgender mice conversation. And really what it comes down to is that a lot of the work that nonprofits, research institutions, and foreign partners are doing is based on decades of research to justify a specific project. And we know that. And so getting caught up in sound bites that are taken out of context or are poorly informed is not something that I would recommend spending your time or attention on. However, where there are opportunities to clarify with funders, with partners, as something does get said that may impact your work, preparing talking points and at least a response, not a reaction, but a response to be able to address some of those concerns that others might call your organization with, or, donors or board members might have questions about if you're related to that work. So the impact on nonprofit organizations for the review of foreign aid projects is that nonprofits engaged in international aid focusing on DEI, climate change, or transgender supports are likely to experience funding disruptions, and it will affect program continuity and staffing. The one thing to keep an eye on in terms of funding cuts or freezes is there are some executive orders that are being challenged where things are moving forward and funding is frozen and the work does need to stop, or stop being reimbursed at least. There are other cases where the funding might freeze while something is in litigation for a legal decision. And so knowing whether or not the funding is being paused for either of those issues helps kind of identify timelines a little bit differently in terms of when things can plan to be reinstated. And then things to keep an eye on: outcomes of the State Department's review and potential expansion of similar scrutiny to domestic programs. This is something that specifically for and I'll get to this in a second. A lot of the policy words that are not being funded anymore by the National Science Foundation, they, a couple of weeks ago pulled grant funding based on, I think it was upwards of 40 words. If they were mentioned anywhere in the research or grant application, the research that was already being conducted was frozen, and future grants wouldn't be approved. This is a pretty good harbinger of things to come for the nonprofit sector in terms of funding for domestic programs, because any sort of scrutiny or questions or clarity that's requested through the USAID projects, we're likely going to see in a couple of weeks or months on the domestic side of things with programs in areas where we haven't already. However, I did hear a really reassuring kind of testimonial, and I'm not able to share the name of the organization, who did have a federal funding partner. Their partner reached out proactively and said, here are the words that are, an issue in the project that you're working on. Update this, resubmit it, and we can continue to move forward. And so there are organizations having a positive response, and there are government officials that are really working with organizations because they know good work is happening. And so making sure that we're thinking about capital G government, and also the grant officers and the program officers and those that we're working with on a day-to-day, week-to-week, quarter-to-quarter basis on a lot of these opportunities, is really important to recognize allies where they do exist, because otherwise we're going to be kind of intentionally or unintentionally isolating ourselves in a way that's not sustainable for the sector. Second, nonprofits suing over the federal funding freeze. This is just kind of a update, and again, focus on our local level or for impact of nonprofit organizations, because this has been an ongoing conversation. So a coalition of nonprofits, including the National Council of Nonprofits, did file a lawsuit challenging a Trump administration's freeze on federal grants and loans, arguing it unlawfully endangers critical services. We know that a lot of this work continues to happen and then needs to be reimbursed, and so this is something that does endanger critical services. We saw this at the state level when there was a 15-month delay on passing a state budget, and there were a lot of organizations that had to make really difficult decisions on who received services and how they received services and how many services they did receive. And so there is, evidence to support this claim. The funding freeze has led to operational disruptions for nonprofits, including layoffs and halted services, as people are working proactively or anticipating that the executive order is going to be successful. And the impact for nonprofit organizations continues to be organizations relying on federal funding do face financial instability if it's a large portion of the operational budget, which does reduce their impact to serve communities. So things to keep an eye on: legal proceedings, outcomes, any modifications to the funding freeze policy, yes. But also this is where, and I know Fred and Hannah talk about this all the time, leaning into organizations that are similar to yours in your geographic or mission area, and like having collaborative, proactive conversations around funding sources and the stability of those funding sources, and how you can kind of cross-refer as things might shift within your micro ecosystem within Southwest PA is really critical. I know there are a lot of times where organizations often see themselves as competitors versus collaborators, but this is a space where, for the sake of continuity of services, we have to break out of that mold a little bit and get comfortable having really uncomfortable conversations to make sure that, as we're looking at the organizations that do a wide array of work locally, we have to figure out, who has sustainability of funding in this bucket versus this bucket, and how services can be done collaboratively. Universities also are halting DEI initiatives amid the federal ban. So this is separate from the USAID and a foreign aid conversation, as it's specific to domestic universities. In response to President Trump's executive orders banning DEI initiatives, universities are suspending related research projects, canceling events, and closing DEI offices to comply and protect their federal funding. This is something that we talked about in our policy committee meeting a couple weeks ago, or last week. just around decisions that are being made out of fear of loss of continued support. There are a lot of, again, narratives online or, memes that you'll see around people kind of jumping ship on offering support to vulnerable communities. And this is a really difficult decision for a lot of institutions who have to decide, do we still want to be able to offer education and resources and all of these other supports that we provide to a community, often geographically, that is reliant on their economic impact? Or is this something that we immediately want to take a stance on? And so, again, looking at, the way that universities are shifting priorities, shifting language around those priorities, there's a lot of nuance in a case-by-case basis. And so, yes, some of educational institutions are proactively discontinuing DEI programs to avoid conflicts with federal initiatives and directives. That does not mean that work is going away. There are, again, cases where the wording of a program or office looks different. However, the impact for nonprofits and the takeaway is that if you are collaborating with a university on a DEI project, you may see that partnership dissolve in name or in actuality, and you may see resources because of that diminish. So again, leaning into, where you have an allied relationship with a trusted grant officer or a researcher within a department, is really critical. And also, there are likely to be future federal actions against DEI efforts and broader implications for diversity-focused initiatives beyond universities, in the nonprofit sector as well. Public opposition to Medicaid cuts. This is an area where we've seen a lot of advocacy action, and I want to thank, again, the Southwest Pennsylvania Partnership on Aging and Greater Pittsburgh Digital Inclusion Alliance for getting us about 3 weeks ahead of where a lot of the conversation has been happening nationally. There was also a rally to support Medicaid hosted by Representative Dan Miller a couple weeks ago downtown. A KFF poll revealed that over 60% of Republicans and Trump voters consider Medicaid vital to their communities, with only about 1/3 supporting the funding cuts. There is significant opposition among conservative constituents to reduce Medicaid funding. This is an area where we might see the Trump administration back off. However, related to the spending bill, the conversation that many conservative lawmakers have been focusing on is, here's the amount of money that we need to cut in order to balance the budget or get closer to what our goal is. Many of those cuts will still have to come to Medicaid, or if you look at the math, or come from Medicaid if you look at the math. And so the impact on nonprofit organizations is nonprofits providing health services may leverage this public sentiment to advocate against Medicaid cuts, ensuring continued support for vulnerable populations. Things to keep an eye on: congressional actions regarding Medicaid funding and potential policy shifts in response to public opinion. I'm going to add 2 more from personal experience. Look at who else is having the Medicaid cut conversation, and what their talking points and data points are. After I continue to the last slide that I have, I'm going to put the link to the SWIPA website, or Christine, if you wouldn't mind finding that and updating it. There are one-pagers on the amount of services in Southwest PA, county by county, Medicaid covers. 41% of births in the United States are supported in some way, shape, or form by Medicaid funding. So looking at the actual impact of these services versus what, again, narratives are being told around them. We know the difference in the nonprofit sector. The gap has to be education and action, making sure that we're educating constituents, voters of the politicians who are still opposing those cuts or are supporting those funding cuts, to make sure that they flip to opposing them. And then again, there's the House GOP is proposing a spending bill amid a government shutdown threat. So this, again, is a tool often used by lawmakers not willing to compromise on a specific thing. In this case, looking at budget cuts, raising concerns about a potential government shutdown if agreements on the budget cuts aren't reached. And this is absolutely related to the Medicaid conversation. So if you have not been already, continue reaching out to your elected officials, calling, emailing. If you're doing so in the capacity of your nonprofit organization, make sure that you are staying in the educational vein of, here's my organization, here's who I represent, here's how Medicaid impacts their lives, here's how I know that this policy is currently supporting the community, and here's the need that we're still seeing beyond the existing Medicaid policy. If you are calling as a constituent, somebody that you voted for, or that you are in their district, you can have a different conversation around your opinions about the policies that they're supporting. But again, if you are calling as a constituent who is an employee of a nonprofit organization, please be sure to very clearly walk the line of advocacy at this point, because there's a lot of outreach happening. And we want to make sure that where we can recognize the expertise and resources in the nonprofit sector, that we're spending time doing so. Again, another example of strong advocacy in Pittsburgh specifically, there was a Stand Up for Science rally recently to protest federal funding uncertainties and affecting research projects, particularly those related to environmental and public health initiatives. Again, if the lawsuit that the National Council of Nonprofits leveraged against the Trump administration cited, funding freezes are a threat to critical services, environmental and public health initiatives are no different. They are absolutely critical services. And so the scientific community specifically is actively opposing federal funding policies that threaten research continuity and public welfare, and they are doing so in an organized way. This is where many universities have been involved as well. So again, looking at seeing a university in the news, if you're seeing a university ending DEI policies, but also standing up for science, there's probably some disconnects happening internally around, the best way to respond to a lot of different initiatives and proposed funding and policy changes for their organization that are going to be impacted. Impact for nonprofit organizations. Nonprofits involved in scientific research or studies or are dependent on scientific data may face challenges due to funding instability and reduced research outputs. The best way, and again, the AIU, I can't thank you enough for being on this morning. The best way to preserve this is getting really solid at data analysis and being able to do some of this research for yourself. And so as we're finding funding uncertainty, to work with third-party providers, to work with universities, to continue this work on a one-to-one basis with a nonprofit and a partner, this is a really critical time to be able to invest in your internal research capacity, to be able to shore up your data and other resources that allow you to continue doing that. And again, things to keep an eye on: government responses to scientific advocacy and potential restoration of research funding. It's likely in some cases. We've seen a lot of backlash to specific executive orders and actions. So odds are that some funding in some buckets is going to be restored. We just don't know what that is yet, and we probably won't until after the government shutdown threat passes. And finally, federal funding freeze and legal challenges. So again, this is an example that just because something is written in an executive order does not mean that it is law. A federal judge temporarily blocked the Trump administration's order to pause federal grants and loans, a move that could have disrupted numerous programs, including those run by nonprofits. This funding freeze has led to legal battles, highlighting the judiciary's role in checking executive actions. I think last week when we were talking about this, there had been 100 lawsuits leveraged against the government in response to executive orders at this point. And that's a lot to be managing. And so the likelihood is that there is going to be, again, some backstepping on a few of these, but we're just going to have to be really tactical and keeping an eye on those where there is a little bit of momentum. Medicaid seems to be one of those. Another one does seem to be, the space of research and recognizing that work is critical to the community. There's continued uncertainty for nonprofits regarding federal funding necessities and what each impact on community is. So again, contingency planning, yes, with your organization and exploring alternative funding sources, but I cannot stress enough the need to collaborate with others who do services similar to yours. And again, things to keep an eye on: the progress of legal proceedings and any policy adjustments resulting from court decisions. Looking at environmental justice initiatives that have been dismantled, and I promise this is my last slide. Actually, let me double check. Yes, that's my last policy slide. The Trump administration has terminated federal environmental justice programs, which aim to address pollution impacts on marginalized communities as part of the broader rollback of DEI efforts. Again, this is an area where you see the intersection of research and DEI on top of each other because they are completely intersectional. And again, we know this, but looking at how those are funded, the words that are used to justify funding and grant applications is where we have to be really proactive and nuanced in getting sustainable funding sources. So the takeaway is that there's elimination of environmental justice programs. They are happening, and that those elimination of programs might increase environmental health disparities in vulnerable communities. So again, echoing the AIU presentation and figuring out ways that we can demonstrate, backed by science, even if it is research within our own organizations, what the impacts of a lot of these decisions are. That is the way that we're going to continue being able to make the case to elected officials, especially for the midterm election. Impact for nonprofit organizations. Environmental nonprofits are focusing on advocacy and remediation in marginalized areas, and they may need to seek alternative funding to adjust strategies to continue this work. Looking at, again, I mentioned midterm election, there are a lot of officials that are going to run based on the threats that are being made to environmental justice initiatives, DEI policies, and we have to be, again, extremely careful about how we advocate in times that are leading up to a midterm election, since this is something that is so charged. There are a lot of things that are charged. This is one of them. Any organization working to get into advocacy and think about, how we can support continuity of services to vulnerable communities, even if there's a candidate or elected official that would do that, do not publicly back them or support them. Actually, don't privately do it either. Looking at the role of a nonprofit organization and continuing to have these conversations, we do have to continue to be nonpartisan broadly for advocacy purposes. For organizations that are really skilled at doing lobbying, this is an area where there are a lot of folks that are engaged in lobbying. The tie-in with smaller organizations that often do advocacy is going to be storytelling, research sharing, and talking point creation and dissemination. And so just looking at areas where nonprofits can be particularly informed and seen as experts, this is a great area as things are still being shifted, especially. And so again, state and local government actions are likely to try to fill the void left by federal program eliminations and potential legal challenges. If you have an ally at the county or at the state level, and that they're open to having conversations about funding that you're receiving, this is something that you should reach out and build that relationship proactively. And then finally, restrictions on public service loan forgiveness. This is, again, related to student loans. A recent executive order does restrict the public service loan forgiveness eligibility for employees of certain nonprofits, particularly those engaged in advocacy or policy work, altering previous qualifications for federal student loan forgiveness. Takeaway, nonprofit employees may face new hurdles in accessing student loan forgiveness, impacting workforce recruitment and retention. This is something that we, as a sector, often struggle with: turnover rates, burnout, and low, and just kind of having open positions within our organizations. However, I think it's a pretty telling decision that specifically advocacy is being targeted as a way to control the way that people get resources and their loans forgiven, because we know it's effective. And so looking at, again, how we can not only be advocating, but doing smart advocacy where, certain organizations are taking the lead and having meetings and sharing talking points. GPNP, absolutely one of those organizations. Whereas story sharing and finding data and creating, again, that cohesive network of those who are informed and informing is really critical at this point, because for specific employees of nonprofit organizations that want to make sure that their student loan payments are secure, that's a conversation that a staff person within an organization that does have an advocacy stance just needs to have with their supervisor, and that's a really tough decision for executive directors, but something that absolutely should be considered. So looking at organizations reassessing employee benefits and support systems to attract and retain talent affected by these challenges, and keep an eye on clarifications for eligibility criteria for student loan forgiveness, and potential advocacy efforts that reverse or modify the restrictions. Also, general advocacy efforts, so that even if there is an organization that is kind of flagged for doing advocacy work, that it makes it really difficult for that to impact a specific individual. Alrighty, so again, and I think we're going to end a little bit early this morning. GPNP priority being safety of nonprofit sector employees, providing support to nonprofit sector employees and those they serve, and facilitating coordination among GPNP members, internal and external referrals to partners who I know are doing this really great work. We've had a lot of one-to-one sessions requested from GPNP on how to advocate. I will continue to beat this drum. The answer is not necessarily to how to advocate. It is, what is your strength in advocacy? Are you really great at research? Are you really great at building relationships with elected officials? Do you have those relationships already? Are you really great at building relationships at the community level and educating? Are you really great at providing education materials? Or are you really great at coordinating? The reason that GPNP doesn't have policy-focused subcommittees is because there are nonprofits in the Southwest Pennsylvania ecosystem that have already taken the lead on issue-specific causes. So, you know, environment, education, housing, infrastructure, and broadband. There are organizations that are already leading those charges, and it doesn't make sense for us to duplicate that work. However, it is critical to loop GPNP in, because as we're talking about the increasing overlap and intersectionality of decisions that are made in one space and how we know that they're going to affect other spaces in weeks and months to come, is critical, because we need to have some canaries in the coal mine when it comes to funding decisions and policy impacts. And we also have to have folks that are willing to step up and have the difficult conversations where advocacy is being challenged. And protect some of the smaller organizations that don't have the same resources to combat some of these legal cases, and, you know, where the smaller organization can provide data, talking point, stories, but not necessarily have to be in the room with an elected official or a lobbyist that's working on behalf of a coalition of nonprofit organizations. So the answer is not necessarily, you know, do more advocacy. It is find your strength in advocacy and partner with those who are able to support your collective doing of more advocacy. And finally, being really clear on education on issues, encouraging civic engagement, monitoring policy impacts, maintaining neutrality in that education stance versus the you should stance. And if anybody needs a refresher, invite them to these calls on Monday mornings. I'm happy to talk about the difference between advocacy, lobbying, and electioneering, especially as we're approaching a midterm election and there's going to be a lot of I don't want to say chaos, but there are going to be a lot of discussions around, you know, the elected officials that are coming in, or different candidates that are going to continue to muddy the waters and make it difficult to keep track of things that are being done by the current administration. And so having more folks engaged in the policy and advocacy space is critical. I'm already proud of GPNP because the national average for organizations as a percentage as nonprofits that advocate is around 2%. Per the last summit data, it's closer to 18% for GPNP members, so we're absolutely crushing it by 9 times. But that, you know, again, if we're going to be successful and really bringing awareness to not only the impacts of the cuts and the policies against the sector right now, but also things like Medicaid that a lot of folks should know often are managed or touched some way, shape, or form by nonprofit organizations, is really critical. A lot of local governments rely on nonprofit organizations to be able to do their work successfully through contracts or grants. And at the state level, it's the same, you know, series of decisions. And so a lot of work that does not often get attributed to the nonprofit sector is kind of under attack right now. And the best thing that we can do is really make sure that folks are aware, one, that the nonprofit sector is the 3rd largest employee base in Pennsylvania. We're more than 15% of employed individuals work for nonprofits. It's larger than manufacturing. And 2, that's a huge voting block and group of individuals that are impacted by this work. And we have a lot of collective power. We just have to tap into it. And, you know, I'm happy to help support. GPNP is happy to help support. Monthly policy committee meetings probably aren't enough for that. So if anybody has any meetings that are already taking place where you're like, hey, Emily really needs to be part of this conversation, please invite me. And if I cannot attend, another member that's in that policy committee group is happy to attend on my behalf to keep folks up to date. That is it for me this morning. I already went over that. Thank you so much for joining, and I will turn it back over to Christine to close out the call.
Thank you so much, Emily. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. Please, as a reminder, go ahead and take our poll so we can keep everything relevant to this group. And next week, we hope you'll join us. We will be joined by the Women and Girls Foundation, Camila Rivera Tinsley and Tatiana Martinez. We're very excited to hear about all of their programming and just all of their successes recently. And we're also very happy to have hosted them in our AI cohort. So you'll hear a little bit about that as well. If you would like to hear more about our AI cohorts for social impact, we do have our demo day coming up on March 19th at Nova Place. It's a free event, but it is ticketed and space is limited. So please be sure to register if you plan to attend. And thank you, Emily. And there's the link to sign up. We really hope to see you. Thank you so much for being here again. And we will see you next week for a chat with Women and Girls Foundation. Have a great week, everyone. Oh,
Yes.
Emily, go ahead. Did you?
Oh, no worries. I figured some folks are still completing the poll too. We have over 90 people registered already for demo day. The space holds 160, and we still have a week and a half where we usually see a surge in the 4 to 5 days before. So if you are even considering attending, please register and block the time, because this is a place where funders, university partners, government officials who, Allegheny County Area Agency on Aging is one of the government departments, one of the first, I want to say internationally, that does have a partnership with AI and their own skilly. And so looking at, ways that these can be very practically applied resources. Don't take it from us. We'll have 50 experts in the nonprofit sector and adjacent social impact sector presenting their own findings. So please register, and I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. Well, next Monday on this call first, then next Wednesday.
I had a question for Falon and Sheila, if they're still on.
Yeah.
So, given your focus and your training offerings and the need that you express for strategic collaboration, how are you advising nonprofits who historically haven't collected data or little data? How are they aligning up with the capacity to collaborate and go after resources together, given the need for universal measurements in specific areas?
So how are we advising them on how to align with universal measures, you're saying? So each project is kind of unique. So with some of the nonprofits we work with, we do a deep dive into their area with them. For example, like arts education or residencies in schools, for arts education. And we do look at, universal measures, and we try to bring those to the table so we're not reinventing the wheel. And as we also do reviews of the data collection that they currently have to see, where things line up, and where they might not have certain measures that they might need based on their logic model. Again, we do a lot of work with logic modeling to tie all those things together to make sure that they're covering all their bases. And, it's sort of based in some of the research. A lot of them are looking at evidence-based practices. So, looking at evidence-based and seeing how they're collecting data is a big part of this as well. Hope that answers. Falon, did you?
I don't think I had anything else to add. Yeah, like you said, it's kind of unique to each program. Some programs are federally funded, and there's, certain deliverables that they're expected to meet. Some programs, like you said, might just be starting out, and we might want to look at some, universally accepted measures or areas of focus, like the sustainable development goals that Christine shared earlier, and things like that. So we really do try to meet programs where they are at. And evaluation is sort of a living process, and as organizations get more adept at it, those goals and what they focus on might change. But yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying it kind of just depends.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Given the span that you see in the sector, what would you advise organizations on this call to focus on as far as data collection in general?
focusing on in general. Well, we've been trying to focus, everyone needs to collect different things based on their funding streams, as Falon mentioned, whether it's federal, state, or local, could be a grant, so we look at that. But in general, we always make sure that there's process and outcomes, making sure that we're not just collecting process data. I mean, it's really important to know if our target population is met, and we definitely want to do that, making sure that we know how much dosage of a service or whatever that might look like we're providing, but we also want to make sure that we also balance it with outcomes. We tend to look at outcomes, making sure everyone has those lining up with their project goals. That's again back to that logic model, making sure that everything is in alignment, and making sure that we have the right outputs, those process measures to look at the outcomes by. There's been a lot of concern right now about collecting certain measures that might be considered DEI, for example, but it's important. We try to use the census sort of as a guide for how we collect race, ethnicity, gender, and different things like that. So we could go back and follow on that. But, depending on the goals of the program, you might want to keep collecting that information. So, we also work a lot with folks generally to make sure that their data is secure and, that it's, we want the data to be protected so that, it's not, people aren't coming after, like we want this data or that about your target populations that you're serving. We know a lot of our nonprofits serve different groups, including immigrant and refugee populations, and holding that data can be kind of a concern for some. So we try to work on making sure that that's protected, and we can still gather that information.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I mentioned some kind of related to that during the policy update, if there are spaces where we know research partnerships are kind of under threat or being defunded, that's an area where I would hope the AIU would see a bunch of requests to have like, okay, how can I do this in-house, to build our own internal capacity, because we know that a certain partnership with a university or, a government office is going to be frozen for, for the time being.